Ladies and gentlemen, without any further ado, allow me to call upon our first guest from tonight's esteemed panel of speakers, Ambassador Ibrahim Rasuul, who is the former Premier of the Western Cape, as well as the former South African Ambassador to the United States of America. Ambassador Ibrahim Rasuul has also met with Dr. Mohammed Morsi on more than one occasion in Washington, as well as the United Nations General Assembly. Please put your hands together for Ambassador Ibrahim Rasuul.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف المرسلين سيدنا ونبينا ومولانا محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم. My respected panelists, my dear brothers and sisters, Jamaat al-Muslimin, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh, and good evening. Today is a day that I think is sketched in sadness. It was on the 14th of August 2013, after the Fajr prayers, that the Egyptian army raided Cairo's Rabaa al-Adawiyah Square as well as Al-Nahda Square and killed in excess of 1,000 people, and that's just the Human Rights Watch report. Thousands upon thousands of people were imprisoned, hundreds were sentenced to death in a travesty of justice as a result of all of that. Today happened 6 weeks after the coup led by Sisi removed the legitimately elected president of Egypt, Mohammed Morsi, from office. Before he was removed from office, he was kept as a hostage in the presidential palace. This was a few years after 2011, when Egypt sparked the Arab Spring after the event in Tunisia. The Egyptians took what was an individual act in Tunis and made it a national act of revolution and revolt in Egypt in 2011, which led to Mubarak having to give up power. It was on this day 6 years ago that Human Rights Watch describes the events that unfolded as, and I quote, that there was a systematically and intentionally used excessive lethal force, and it was planned at the highest level in the then Egyptian government. This was not police that lost their heads. This was not a situation of violence that provoked the police. Human Rights Watch, based in New York, described this as a systematic and intentional use of lethal force. They go so far as to say that there were snipers outside the hospitals. Firstly, that there was an attack on medical facilities around Rabat, and there was snipers placed to shoot at anyone who tried to enter or leave the hospitals. This was the cold-bloodedness of what happened 6 years ago. And I'm very happy that I am Human Rights Foundation, as well as the Egyptian community of South Africa, have chosen, even in these days when we celebrate Eid al-Adha, even in these days, to say that our celebration cannot be left without a commemoration of what happened on this day 6 years ago. What kind of Muslims have a pure and unadulterated celebration of something wonderful in Islamic history, without remembering the tragic moments in that same history. Because it is one continuum from the sacrifices of Nabi Ibrahim alayhi salatu wasalam to the sacrifices of the martyrs at Rabah al-Adawiyah and at Nahda and all over Egypt since then. My journey with the Arab Spring Egypt began when I was in the ambassadorial residence in Washington, D.C. of South Africa, and I received a letter signed by someone called Muhammad Mursi, the president of the Freedom and Justice Party, saying, Ibrahim, can you please come and help us in Egypt? We are busy with the Arab Spring and we need to know what to do. I had to write back to him that I was an ambassador and that I couldn't choose sides in the situation, and maybe if he was to be the government in waiting, then we could be helping. I got a phone call from the phone of Dr. Issam Al-Haddad in December 2011, and he put Dr. Mursi on the line and he said, we have won the parliamentary elections, we have won the first round of the presidential elections, we will soon be the government of Egypt, can you come now? I said to him, I will be there in January inshallah, because I was going to the Khartoum University as a member of the council there. I landed in Egypt in January in 2012 and spent 3 days with the most optimistic Egyptian leadership that I have ever seen. People who were glimpsing freedom, people who had seen the Pharaoh fall, people who had understood that this Arab Spring was not an Egyptian spring, but was not only an Arab Spring, but was an Islamic spring. Maybe this was the moment at which the Ummah of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam could rise up and free themselves of the shackles that have kept us under the yoke of dictatorships, of one-party states, of authoritarian regimes, of monarchies that have suppressed our will to be free, that have suppressed the hurriyah that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had intended for us. And this was the optimism. My guide there was Jihad al-Haddad, the son of Dr. Issam. My briefer at that point, who became a great friend of mine, was Khalid al-Qazaz, who was jailed in the pool and whose child was born soon after the revolution, and he phoned me and he said, Ibrahim, I want to ask your permission, can I name my daughter after your daughter? And I said, my daughter is named after your square, because she was born when Nelson Mandela was freed, and I gave her the name Tahrir. And he said, do I have your permission to name my daughter Tahrir? And I said, you don't need it, because you are the land that could be free. That was the visit to Egypt. I met with Khairat al-Shatir, that I thought that one of the sharpest minds was disqualified from being president. Not even, imagine we use the same laws that Egypt had to say that because Nelson Mandela fought against apartheid, he was disqualified to be president because he had fought against apartheid. That's the stupidity of the laws that were applied in Egypt at that time. I met the Murshid, Fadilatul Murshid, at the headquarters of the Muslim Brotherhood, and what a wonderful reception and the sense of humble joy that we experienced there. And I'm explaining this to you like this because I want us to remember the optimism and the joy that was there before this day, 6 years ago, so that we don't lose it. Because we must be the ones who must not be depressed and disillusioned, but we must be the one who must keep the spark alive, so that inshallah we are able to say that the destiny of the Ummah is to be free, is not to be dictated to, is not to be under the thumb of authoritarianism. In March 2012, a delegation of the Freedom and Justice Party and the Muslim Brotherhood came for a high-level meeting with State Department and the White House in Washington, D.C. They landed at the airport, came to my house in Washington, D.C. We sat and we planned. The next morning, I was in the office of Under Secretary of Foreign Affairs of State Department, Robert Burns, to say, this is what the delegation is coming to achieve here today. And we have prepared them to achieve this. And that was the way in which that first visit, the first ever official visit by Egyptian liberation fighters, arrived in Washington, D.C. In September, I spent more time at the United Nations General Assembly with the delegation led by President Morsi than I even did with the delegation led by President Zuma. Because it was one of those very important meetings in which we sat in New York with the whole of civil society and President Morsi explaining the vision for a free Egypt, an inclusive Egypt, a democratic Egypt, an Egypt that keeps its treaties, an Egypt that is able to do what it must do in the world. And so, I was in South Africa, in Pretoria, accompanying President Obama for his state visit in 2013 in June, here in Pretoria in South Africa. At the press conference with President Zuma, he was asked about the situation in Egypt. And then, when I left that press conference, I said to my wife, I have a feeling from President Obama's remarks that the Arab Spring may be over. Because I got the impression that he was going to turn a blind eye to whatever may be done to the democratically elected government of Egypt and the democratically elected president of Egypt. I left South Africa at the beginning of July, and when I landed in Washington, D.C. after a long flight, I put on my phone and I heard the coup had happened, except that no one called it a coup d'etat, a military takeover. And so, the Arab Spring that had made our spirits soar, that had made us hopeful and joyful and optimistic about the world, that indeed dictatorships could come to an end. Suddenly, the Arab Spring, not only in Egypt, had a setback, but all over the Muslim world, we saw the hope being pushed back, counter-revolution stalking the land, coup d'etats threatening, that even in Tunisia, where it all was sparked by Mohammed Bouazizi, even there, a Nahda of Rashid al-Ghanouchi had to withdraw and retreat in order to just save the situation and not let the army move in. That's why we come together on a night like this to remember, because in memory, we must retain the spark. It was one of the saddest things to see the attempted humiliation of President Morsi in prison, charged with things that no president is charged for, insulting the judiciary. For example, spying on your own country of which you are the president. Murder, when you have to defend your palace, when the army refuses to defend it, and ordinary citizens come to defend you. You are charged as the president with inciting murder. And it's important for us to understand this, so that we can say it, because outside there is just the sense that Morsi made a mistake. He made a problem. He created his own downfall. I have seen presidents who have done worse, who have been responsible for millions of deaths in places like Iraq, millions of millions of deaths in places like Iraq, not even being hauled in front of a Truth and Reconciliation Commission, let alone a court of law. In April 2015, the Egyptian court sentenced President Morsi to 20 years in prison. On the 16th of May, with 105 other leaders, he was sentenced to death. In June 2016, sentenced to a life in prison. And then in court on the 17th of June 2019, just a few months ago, may Allah have mercy on his soul and give him the highest place in Jannah, he collapsed in that very court. And later, under mysterious conditions, passed away. This is the injustice that we are speaking about. Crispin Blunt, the British parliamentarian who had led a commission of review into the conditions under which President Morsi was kept, he said, and I quote, "We feared that if Dr. Morsi was not provided with urgent medical assistance, the damage to his health may be permanent and possibly terminal. Sadly, we have been proved right." Unquote. No wonder the statement by the Ikhwan was to say this was not natural causes. This was premeditated murder, and the jury is out on that. And so, as I end, my dear brothers and sisters, I want to say that we are in danger, that the world may become, and Africa may become, and even South Africa may become comfortable with the idea of having someone like Abdel Fattah al-Sisi as head of the African Union, as a respected member of the United Nations, as a bona fide member of the Organization of the Islamic Community, on this forum and that forum and that forum. Our African Union itself has a policy against membership of countries where the government came into being as a result of coup d'etats. And although no one has called it in the West a coup d'etat, in a chapter that I wrote in a book on Afro-Arab Spring and the African Renaissance, I had a chapter called The Pharaoh Returns. And in that, I, for example, analyzed what is the template of a coup d'etat. The most common features was that in all of the major coup d'etats, in Chile in 1973, Congo in 1960, Turkey in 1993, Iran 1953, Haiti 2004, in most of those, the overthrown government was the first ever democratically elected government of that country. Just like President Morsi was the first democratically elected in Chile with Allende, it was the same thing. In Congo with Lumumba, it was the same thing. And so we can go on and show that the coups target not those who have been there for a long time, and certainly doesn't go to dictatorships. It goes to those who are newly democratic. Secondly, in all of those cases, the new government lasted either 2 months, like in Congo under Lumumba, or 2 years, like in Iran under Mossadegh in 1953. They had to kill it quickly before the root of human rights, the roots of democracy, the roots of freedom grow too deep, and the people will naturally be intolerant to dictatorships because they would have forgotten about authoritarianism, monarchies, and dictatorships. Very interestingly, in almost all of those coups, the coup was led by a general trained in the West, Mobutu Sese Seko was trained in the Front Populaire in Belgium. Sisi himself was trained at the American War College in Pennsylvania. And so we can go on with General Cedras, also trained in the USA, who overthrew the government in Haiti. The same with Pinochet in Chile. These are not coincidences. These are the templates of a coup. 30 years later, when you read the CIA minutes of the coup, for example, in Congo, you now see the role of the CIA. In the 1980s, 30 years after the records were freed of the coup in Iran, the name Kermit Roosevelt comes up and how he took bags of money into Iran for that coup. We are probably going to have to wait for the 30 years to pass to see exactly what the role was of these Western powers in the coup that overthrew President Morsi. The interesting thing that we must say is that every coup had sponsored violence or uprisings before it happened in order to justify the fact that it will happen. In 1953, Kermit Roosevelt took suitcases of money to Iran and bought the gangs and told them to riot in Tehran until the Shah could be brought back. And that's exactly what happened. In Haiti, a person called Butuya marched on Port-au-Prince, and they called it the Cannibal Army because they seemed to eat everyone on the road to Port-au-Prince, creating so much violence that the coup was justified by General Cedras. This is no different to what happened in June, the sustained protest in Tahrir Square to create the impression that President Morsi was not popular, was not legitimate, and was not elected. And on the basis of that, they said that there were more people in Tahrir Square than the people who voted for President Morsi. Tahrir Square, I've been there. If you can squeeze in 1 million people, it's a lot. I know that President Morsi got 51% of the vote. In fact, 51.7%, more than President Obama got in his election. And so, my brothers and sisters, I want us to really think about the state of the Ummah today. Egypt is the cultural heartland of the Arab world, the Middle East, of the Muslim world. And therefore, there is no way that we can have Egyptians being demoralized, even in the face of this enormous tragedy that we come to commemorate today. And therefore, we need you to be able to stand firm and to give us hope, because Allah is testing not our ability to absorb the punishment, but to fight back. And the ability to stand up again, the ability to be resilient, the ability for us to say that the destiny of the Ummah is not dictatorship. That every dictator looks powerful, like Mubarak looked, until they fall. Like apartheid looked, until it falls. And that is the hope that we have. So may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless the Egyptians with sabr in the most resilient sense of the word. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give the martyrs the highest place in Jannah, inshallah, led by President Morsi. May he be the president of the martyrs in paradise, inshallah. May in his memory a next generation of people intolerant of dictatorship emerge in Egypt. May those who are there and who are repressed and suppressed every day, may they have the patience to withstand it, inshallah. And may we all around the world say that there cannot be a place for people, there cannot be a respectable place for people who have done despicable things in this world. Wa akhiru da'wana and alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen.